Do have a quorum of the Board of Finance. So let me call this regular meeting of the Board of Finance to order. For the record, today is Tuesday, November 21st, 2023. We are meeting in the City Hall auditorium and by Zoom. For the record, it is 5:05. Board of Finance members participating in person are Ms. Pesky and Ms. Iannacito, and participating via Zoom, we have Mr. Wright and Mr. Anderson. Before we get into the agenda, could we kindly stand and pledge the flag? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Okay. So a little housekeeping first. I will entertain a motion to open the meeting to public for public comment.
So moved.
I heard Ms. Pesky, seconded by Mr. Anderson. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Anyone from the public wishing to address the board?
Fiona Capabianca, 3 Stone Ridge Drive. Good evening, members of the Board of Finance and Mayor Carbone. I am disappointed to be speaking during public comment regarding the audit prior to the presentation by the auditors, but we have been given no choice. Typically, this review has been done in a joint meeting with the Board of Education, having a seat at the table to ask questions as they pertain to the Board of Ed portion of the audit. For some reason, this is being handled differently this year. What has not been handled differently is the Board of Ed receiving a bill for $9,000 for this audit. We are requesting a copy of the total bill and the breakdown of the charges and the extensions. Many times we have sat before you when the concept of shared services comes up to save money, even though the feasibility study that was conducted shows there is no savings to do that. The real barrier to shared services is trust. The trust is not there. We listened to the mayor during the budget process last year, cast doubt on the Board of Education and what the audit would show, almost giddyish about it. Allegations were made of vehicle purchases and other items that coincidentally do not appear in the audit. They don't appear because they didn't happen. All of these things surely had an impact on the allocation of funds to city departments versus Board of Education. Not to mention was very insulting to all of our staff at central office. The audit shows a very different story than what was portrayed to the Board of Finance and the public. Over and over, the $200,000 allotment for the turf field was discussed, and in a fashion that no one knew about this. The discussions and meeting regarding this date back to May 10th of 2022. On this date, Leslie from the audit firm spoke with Ed Aram and Angela, the accountant from central office, regarding how this journal entry should be recorded. The direction was to put into grant as a separate fund, and the journal entry should be Torrington High School turf replacement. On May 12th, 2022, the Board of Education did all the journal entries as requested by the auditor. These items were discussed at the monthly meeting with the mayor. On March 7th, 2023, another meeting was convened with the mayor, Attorney Michelle, Robin, John Barlow, Scott, Sulabomsky, Mario, and Ed Aram. Please keep in mind the first time this was brought up since the spring when the journal entry was determined how to be recorded. At that meeting, it was asked that the funds be transferred to capital reserve instead of grant Torrington High School turf replacement. On April 17th, 2023, another meeting was held with Scott, Robin, Ed, and Jessica and Leslie via phone to ensure we were in compliance. June 21st, 2023, officially voted on by the Board of Finance to move these funds into capital reserves. I would also like to remind everyone, the Board of Ed is not actually responsible for maintaining these fields, replacing these fields, or the buildings. We're trying to help out. To create an illusion of mismanagement when the city was aware of what was going on is nothing short of just flat wrong. Fast forward to when we requested a copy of the audit as we were not provided one. Imagine our surprise when reviewing the findings. Everyone completely understands staffing changes and being short-staffed and the daily implications to those factors. What people don't understand is fabricating issues to distract from the real issues detected in the audit. While I am hopeful that the Board of Finance will move past the turf field allotment that was done based on instruction and the fact that the money is still in the city coffers and focus on the real items in the audit regarding budget overruns in the city departments totaling $788,994. Since these items did not have offsetting revenue sources and were over $100,000, they should have been put out to voter referendum. Other item I'm hoping we can get clarification on is the repeated removal of funds from the internal service fund, our health insurance fund that technically belongs to our employees. For several years now, $2 million per year has been removed from this fund without knowledge by the Board of Education, even though we own a large percentage of this fund. Can the auditors please address if this is allowable and if this can be done without Board of Education consent? In closing, I am hoping that any questions regarding the Board of Education as it pertains to the audit will be addressed to the Board of Education. Even though we were told we could only be in the audience, it would clearly make sense to have us be the ones answering the questions. I would also like to put on the record my concerns that we are discussing the June 30, 2022 audit in November of 2023. And the direction from the city is that the June 30, 2023 audit will not begin to take place until March. When a meeting was called about this, I was asked if the chair and vice chair of the Board of Education could attend this meeting to understand it. And the response was that no, only paid executives could attend. There are checks and balances in place for a reason. There is no reason to delay this audit. The Board of Education is ready to start our audit now, and that's how we would like to proceed. It is counterproductive to be working on the audit during the budget process for next year, which is an extremely busy time, and not very productive to find out any potential issues we may have a year later. That's why we have these checks and balances. Please reconsider the timing of the June 30, 2023 audit. Delaying this another year makes no sense to anyone. Thank you for your time.
Is there anyone else from the public that wishes to address the board? Seeing and hearing none, we'll move into item number 2. I'll entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
So moved. Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wright, and seconded by Mr. Anderson. Questions or comments on the minutes? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we'll move into item 3. Item 3 is a presentation of the audit from our CLA auditing firm. This is the fiscal year 2022 audit. Presenting is Leslie Zoll, and Jessica, I think, is second chair.
Thank you very much for having us tonight. We are here to present the June 30th, 2022 numbers. So our agenda tonight, we'll try and go as quick as we can. I'm sure you have a robust agenda tonight. I just want to go over the terms of the engagement, overall results of the audit, financial statement highlights that might be of concern or use to you, and then I'm going to have Jessica talk about the federal and state single audit results, our required communication to the Board of Finance, and upcoming GASB pronouncements for the upcoming years. In terms of what our audit consists of, we do express opinions on whether or not the basic financial statements are presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. We express an in relation to opinion over the schedule of expenditures of federal awards in the federal single audit, as well as the schedule of expenditures of state financial assistance in the state single audit. We express an opinion on compliance related to major federal and state programs. We also provide a report on internal controls over financial reporting as a whole, but we do not opine on internal controls as the scope of our audit. We also provide a report on internal control over compliance related to major federal and state programs. Again, we do not express an opinion on internal controls. Just to summarize the audit results for the year, bear with me, I'm trying to change pages here. You did receive an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. There were no compliance findings over the financial statements as a whole. However, there was one material weakness in internal control and one significant deficiency in internal control. And I'm going later on in the agenda, I'm going to describe what those words mean and what those findings were about. On the state single audit side, we did have a qualified opinion for Brownfields Remediation and Development Grant Program under the reporting requirements of the grant. That was also a material weakness in relation to that Brownfields grant, and we also have one significant deficiency. Again, we will go over what those findings are later in the program. On the federal single audit side, you did receive unmodified opinions on the major federal programs that we tested. However, you did have two significant deficiencies in internal control. I just want to spend a few minutes on the financial statements as they stand on 6/30/2022. This slide that you're seeing right here is a snapshot within the management's discussion analysis. If you want to look later on where that page is, it's page 7 of the report. I like to show this particular schedule because it shows your governmental activities, which include all of your funds on a full accrual basis of accounting, with the exception of your pension funds and OPEB trust funds. Your net position is negative as of 6/30/2022 of $29.9 million. That was actually the deficit, I believe is lowered. It was an increase of $14.9 million from the previous fiscal year. On your business type activity side, your net position was $11.7 million. That's an increase of $648,000 for the year. This next table shows your governmental funds on a modified basis of accrual in accordance with government accounting standards. We opine on each column that's considered a major fund. So you'll see those 5 major funds on this schedule. The remaining funds are part of the aggregate remaining opinion unit. In terms of the general fund as of 6/30/2022, your fund balance was $18.4 million. 14.7 of that is unassigned. That's an increase of $963,000 from last year. In your bonded projects, fund balance is $8.1 million. That increased by $2.6 million. That's a result of your bond issuance of $7 million during fiscal year 22. Your WPCA infrastructure projects has a fund balance of $447,000. That's increased by $6.3 million this year. You've permanently financed some of your clean water fund loans. And then the Torrington High School renovation has a negative unassigned fund balance of $1.5 million. That decreased by $264,000 during the year. The non-major governmental fund column that you see here on the screen is a combination of all of your others, smaller funds within the city. Total fund balance accumulated is 21.7 million. That's increased by 4.7 million from the previous fiscal year. The next slide, in the basic financial statements is in relation to the WPCA Enterprise Fund. Total net position of that fund at 6/30/22 was 11.7 million. That increased 947,000 from last year. And then the internal service fund column, that column combines your self-insurance fund as well as your maintenance fund. Total net position is 12.4 million, and that was an increase of 2.5 million from the previous fiscal year. And then the last basic financial statement is on your pension and OPEB trust funds. Total net position is 107 million. That decreased 20 million from the previous fiscal year. And then just some high level financial highlights of some of the other pieces in your ACFR. As I mentioned before, unassigned fund balance is 14.7 million. That's 11% of your general fund expenditures. Net pension liability is 59.2 compared to last year, that compared to 21, which was 35.4 million. And you can see there in between, there's two pension funds for the municipal employees as well as the police and fire. Currently, municipal pension liability is funded at 75%. Police and fire is funded at 59%. And your net OPEB liability at 121 million compared to 142 million last year. Does anybody have any questions on the actual numbers? Moving on to the internal control findings. I just wanted to take this opportunity to kind of explain in audit world what a deficiency in internal control really means. A deficiency in internal control means that during the normal course of operations, management would not, we feel that management would not detect or be able to correct those misstatements. Now, there's two levels of that type of deficiency. One is a significant deficiency and one is a material weakness. Significant deficiency is not as critical as material weakness is. However, significant deficiency does rise to the level that warrants a discussion with those charged with governance, which is the Board of Finance, which I'm here to explain to you tonight. The other one is a material weakness that we find that those particular findings raise the level of materiality within the financial statements as a whole. So within the federal single audit as well as the state single audit, there are two findings related to the financial statements as a whole. Finding 22001 is a material weakness over financial reporting. During the course of our audit, we did find material issues with the financial statements in terms of beginning fund balance, accounts receivable, deferrals, and revenue recognition. Finding 22002 is a significant deficiency. This is just related to the transfer to capital projects by the Board of Ed budget that does require approval by the Board of Finance prior to transferring funds from their operating budget.
All right, so I'm gonna step in and start to talk about the federal single audit and the state single audit. And this is an audit of the grants that the city receives and whether they're sourced from the federal government or through the state. So first off, the federal single audit, the total awards expended for fiscal year 22 was 12.6 million. We are required to test certain programs based on a risk analysis. So the two programs that we tested this year was the Education Stabilization Funds and also known as ESSER, and the American Rescue Plan Act Local Fiscal Recovery, also known as ARPA. We had 2 findings under the ARPA program. And these, as Leslie just explained, were significant deficiencies on these specific programs. And the 2 findings were that the policy for procurement was not in accordance with uniform guidance. There's specific requirements when a municipality uses grant funds and they have to go out to bid for a project. So the city's procurement policy needs to be updated to include the specific requirements under uniform guidance. And the second one is the ARPA reporting, that they were filed, but there was no subsequent review before they were filed. So in a perfect world, somebody would prepare the report, somebody else would review it before it gets filed, just to make sure there were no mistakes or typos or anything like that. So those were the 2 findings on the federal single audit. On the state side, the total expenditures on state grants was 49.6 million. And there were 3 programs tested: the Clean Water Revenue Bonds, the Brownsfield Remediation and Development, and the Tiered Pilot Grants programs. As far as the Clean Water Revenue Bonds, that was an unmodified opinion. So there were no control issues or compliance findings on that program. There was a qualified opinion and material weakness and internal controls for Brownsfield. As it relates to reporting, there was a report that was due on December 31st that was not filed. So that's where that qualified opinion comes in, because we didn't have a report to test. And then on the third program, similar to ARPA, there was 1 person involved in preparing and submitting the reporting over the tiered pilot grants. So going through our required governance communication for fiscal year 22, there was a new standard adopted. It was the GASB 87 for leases. Management, which I will go through in a couple bullet points, but management evaluated leases to determine if they were material and needed to be included in the financial statements. Inherent in any financial statements are significant estimates, and our requirement of a significant estimate is to make sure that there's no management bias with them. So some of the significant estimates included in the financial statements were the capital assets, where management determines the useful lives to calculate the depreciation, the net pension liability and the net OPEB liability, which are actually calculated by a third-party actuary and reviewed by management, and then the IBNR liability, which is the incurred but not reported for healthcare claims. During the course of the audit, we had no disagreements with management. Management did not consult with other accountants. And what that basically means is if they didn't like something that we were discussing, they didn't go out and get a second opinion to see, just basically opinion shopping and see if there's a opinion that better suits what they are thinking. There was a delay in the audit due to the uncompleted financial statements. So that's why we're here and discussing fiscal 22. And as far as the leases, because management looked at them and they were determined to not be material enough to be included in the financial statements, but they were above our threshold to report to those charged with governance, sorry. They are required, and I'm not sure if you guys have the letter, but there's a form attached to our letter that I'm summarizing here. And it basically says, we know the leases are out there. This is the amount that management is passing on. It's not material. It won't change the reader's opinion on the financial statements, but it is enough that we need to disclose that it's out there. It is something that's going to have to get looked at every year. If there's new leases at the city and they become material, it may have to be included in the financial statements at that point. There was also an immaterial cash reconciling item that wasn't posted to the general ledger. And again, this was not material to the financial statements, but it was above our threshold to disclose to you. We had no independence issues for the audit. And I'm just going to go through the GASB pronouncements, which are the upcoming standards. So for fiscal year 23, there's a couple standards here: conduit debt, public, private, and public partnerships. Neither of these we expect to impact the city. The one that's going to be the biggest impact is statement 96, which is subscription-based IT technology arrangements. And this is very similar to the lease standard for 22. Any subscription or software arrangements that are over a year are going to have to be analyzed to see if they're material and need to be included in the financial statements. For fiscal 24 is statement 99, which is an omnibus, which is kind of a cleanup of some previous statements. It's maybe some wording differences in your footnotes, but it won't have any large effect. And then statement 100, which is accounting changes and error corrections. So if there are any error corrections or future accounting changes, that gives more guidance on how to report that. And then for 2025 is statement 101, which is compensated absences, which is just clarifying the calculation of compensated absences, what's included, just to make all municipalities a little more consistent. So with that, if anybody has any questions.
So the floor is open for questions. I do want to clarify one point. You heard Fiona say that they were disappointed that they were not invited to a joint meeting, that this is traditionally done in a joint meeting. I just went back to 2017. This audit review has never been done in a joint meeting. It is always a review done strictly and solely by the Board of Finance. Other boards are always invited to hear the report. So just for that clarification. Floor is open for questions from the Board of Finance members. No questions?
Mayor,
Mr. Anderson.
sorry, I raised my hand, but Zoom is not responsive. So I think I was going to ask something that you might have already clarified. So, and I don't know if the auditors plan. Some of the points that Fiona mentioned, I want to make sure that we're properly addressing them. I do recall the conversation where certain notes or findings were discovered during the process. Did we receive an otherwise unqualified opinion because issues were noted and then corrected by journal entries, making it effectively not a problem?
There's so much static, background static that I couldn't really hear your question. Could you restate the question, please?
I sure
put it in
can.
the
Is that a
chat.
little bit?
That's better. Yes.
My Bluetooth keeps rubbing on my collar. So some of the conversations we had earlier in the year when this audit was starting to go on about the vehicle posting and certain journal entries that needed some guidance. Could the auditors opine? I mean, did we receive an otherwise unqualified opinion on those sections because certain issues were noted and then corrected? How did that all work?
So I'm looking across at Robin, and I don't know if you want to take a microphone over here. You don't. The question is, when we were reviewing all of the financials as the audit process was being undertaken, there were certain transactions that had been identified. And in those conversations, as they were being identified, were the corrections being made as we were progressing through the audit? And that's the reason that they were not highlighted within the audit.
So Christopher, I'm just going to answer your question for you. So during the course of the audit, there's, our review process, and corrections can be made to the financial statements that got issued as the ACFR included those corrected misstatements. We're required as an auditing firm to disclose those material transactions that we noted, which is included in that finding I discussed earlier.
Thank you. That was my understanding as well. So if a correction needs to be made and was made, then that is not as big a problem, say, as a dual control issue, for example.
I'm not sure I'm understanding that. I mean, it is critical that material adjustments need to be made to the city's financial statements when the audit is presented. That's why there's material weaknesses and internal control over the entity. So I do think that the fact that we needed to make those corrections is significant. However, it allowed you to get an unmodified opinion on the financial statements once those corrections were made.
That's perfect. And that's the same as my understanding. So it wasn't great that we needed corrections, but as long as the corrections were made, then everything is now better. Yes?
Well, we feel the financial statements presented are materially presented within generally accepted accounting principles.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Other questions? Follow-up questions? That's the current, that will be the 23 fiscal year. It came up during a review of a report that a vehicle was purchased out of the instructional equipment line item. And I'm breaking my own rule about having a conversation outside of what's been moved and seconded on the floor. Other questions for the auditing firm? All right.
The significance of these in the looking at in a 1-year time frame. If we don't fix them, then obviously that's going to be a problem. But is there a significant problem because of a one-time thing? Some of them look like we need to increase some of the procedures that we use, the filing with the state and the federal government of those reports with the 2 people. I understand that that's a problem in the reporting itself of how both entities ask us to report them. There really isn't the opportunity for 2 people to review them.
Currently, there's no controls in place to have 2 people review them. For whatever
Controls,
reason.
but the process of entering it,
Can be submitted without that second,
it can be.
right?
It has,
That, and it was, that's.
It
where those
was.
files- Right.
So we need to establish a policy to do it.
Correct.
It wasn't illegal
no, but
to do it.
state statute do require you to have control
Control.
over the, over your filing. And in an audit world, we clarify that control as being somebody from management is going to detect or correct any misstatements in that reporting requirement. And if there's no subsequent review, there's no checks and balances within the management structure to catch those. Hence the significant deficiencies.
And there's also 2 types of findings. So there's the control findings and the compliance findings. So for the Brownsfield, the compliance finding failed because the report was never submitted. For the other 2, the ARPA and the pilot, the control side failed because it was submitted, it was timely. We had no issues with the submission, but like Leslie just said, prior to that submission, we need to see the controls are in place. So and I just want to make sure that you understand there's a control finding and a compliance finding. So they were not compliance findings, nothing was wrong on that side, but the control process was what the finding is in relation to.
So the bigger question of fixing this and then not having it happen again, I'm thinking in terms of our bond ratings and those kind of situations. Are you allowed to give your opinion as to how this might affect our bond rating?
No.
Thank you.
And so just for clarification, what we do immediately when we get these reports and these are the findings, the first thing we do is we look at that and say, how can we do this better? Where did the breakdown in compliance occur? These reporting mechanisms now are portals where somebody is going in and they're entering the data into the portal. Years ago, it was, there was a process that included paper copies. It was prepared by somebody in the department. It was reviewed by the comptroller, and then it was submitted. These portals created this real easy path to prepare the report and hit send without that additional oversight. So developing a policy as to how that will function going forward has been what our takeaway from this audit was. The Brownfields grant was an interesting situation where these grants are awarded, they take multiple years to administer, and the reporting requirement from the original grant document said that there must be an annual reporting. There are also quarterly budget reports that are filed. And at one point, the state stopped looking for the annual report. And so these quarterly budgets were being filed properly, but the annual report had not been filed. Again, and I guess that rule has also changed with the state of Connecticut, DECD. They're not looking for those annual reports right now. They are relying on those quarterly. So, but again, what do we take? The takeaway of any evaluation, anybody who's been through an evaluation process, that's what this is. It's an evaluation process. How can we be better? How can we be stronger? Developing those policies to make sure that those internal controls are in place and in practice is number one. Obviously, we know that there are some areas where communication and I would even say a little overkill would be bringing more of these directly to the Board of Finance, so that the Board of Finance is also seeing them and getting an opportunity to approve them or acknowledge that they've received them. So policy work is, in progress, and this board will see those policies.
In time for our internal systems to be adjusted so that we're not sitting here again next year in this position? And is this contributing to the delay of not starting the audit yet?
No. No, the reason for the delay and not starting, that was the other thing I wanted to, as I was looking at all the prior minutes. Audit reports delivered to the Board of Finance have occurred. The 2021 audit report didn't occur until October of 2022. The 2020 audit occurred in April of 2021. I stopped writing the months down. The audit report to the Board of Finance is always months after the audit has been completed. Extensions of time, historically over the last 10 years, I'm not sure prior to that, we have traditionally gone beyond the December 31st date. We've been under extensions going into January, into February. This past year was the exception. We did go well beyond the acceptable extension period. That was primarily because of the short staffing that we have in our finance department. I'm looking at Leslie and Jessica. I think, every Zoom call or telephone conference that we had, whether it included Mr. Petrozelli or Mr. Aram, it was always, we're getting as much information as we can. We're correcting these journal entries as we need to, and working very short-staffed and with new staff. I will tell you that didn't get any better in the latter half of the fiscal year 23 or the first half of the fiscal year 24. I just 45 minutes before this meeting was in an interview trying to find a candidate to fill a vacant deputy comptroller position. We have a payroll clerk that is retiring in March. We have an open AP position. We have an open purchasing clerk position. So those are the challenges that we are dealing with. I take no solace in the fact that we are not the only municipality that is dealing with this. There are other municipalities that are also dealing with the same dilemma. But that's not where we want to be. We certainly want to be working better. I'd also like to address the request by the board chair to participate in a staff meeting. You know, there's a fine line between day-to-day operations and, you know, roles and responsibilities. What is the responsibility of your superintendent and your business director and your comptroller and financial team versus what are the responsibilities of the Board of Finance? I would no sooner have accepted or allowed members of the Board of Finance to participate in any of those meetings. In fact, it would have made more sense if a Board of Finance member had participated, because what do we know? These audits are audits of one organization, the City of Torrington. The Board of Education is a department of that organization. So I recognize that there was some offense taken. Fact of the matter is, when dealing with vendors that are hired to provide a service, all of those external influences of volunteer board members don't make that process easier. So that was the reason when the request came to me for participation by volunteer members of the public, my answer was, these are staff meetings with this, with a vendor that's providing a service to the city.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What is the plan for the 2023 audit? Is there a timeline?
So yes, there is. So that was the purpose of the meeting that I asked, the kickoff meeting with Mr. Petrozelli and the superintendent, Robin, and I met. The plan is, you know, obviously we're trying to get this so that we can reasonably try to get this accomplished in the first quarter of 2024. Realistically, I will tell you, it will most likely happen in the second quarter of 2024. We will be filing a request for an extension with OPM. And I know that Robin and Dan Farley has certainly helped fill a lot of the gaps in that department as well, are pulling together the resources, the reports that are necessary. I brought Alice Crew back into the finance office. She's working 3 days a week to help us close out those 2023 reconciliations and any of the journal entry corrections that need to be made. We, this past month, also brought in temp work specifically for the accounts payable position so that all of those checks and invoices can be processed on a more timely basis, and doing the best that we can to find permanent positions. Grateful for CLA's patience with us. I think we've had a lot of phone calls where it's tense because we know we need to get something. We know we need to get it within a certain timeline, and we're trying to meet those timelines. But I also recognize that when you have almost 50 years of institutional knowledge, retire all in the same year or move into other positions in the city, that there is going to be a major setback. Other questions from the board?
Mayor, if I may, a question for the auditors. Still trying to figure out my video, I apologize. We noted a couple of internal control deficiencies this year. In part of your review of prior year audits, are any of them the same as previous years? Is there anything that we've not addressed in a couple years, or are these new deficiencies related to some of our changing staff?
These are new this year.
These are-
These are not repeat findings.
Okay. Does that tend to present better to creditors in your opinion, or is that not something you can opine on?
It does look good for OPM when findings are issued in the audit report and corrected by management. So OPM will be looking for a corrective action plan from the city to make sure that those findings are resolved.
Good. And if I were to say that we have a pretty good history of correcting internal control deficiencies as they arise or when they arise, that speaks well for the city of Torrington, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Other questions for the auditors? All right.
Thank you very
Since
much.
it's 2 days before Thanksgiving, I'm sure you'd rather get on the road and get home. Thank you very much. We are looking forward to getting back on track and meeting with you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you both. All right. There being no other business before the board, I'll move into item number 4. I'll entertain a motion to consider business by department heads.
So
So
moved.
moved. Second.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson, seconded by Mr. Wright. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Dan, I heard a question from Ms. Pesky about the impact of this audit and these findings on the bond rating. Did you just want to share with the board and those attending where we are?
So generally, when we go out to bond, we've been working with Standard & Poor's. And they've given us a bond rating of AA-, which is still, it's a great credit rating. But once the audit was completed, Moody's was waiting to give us their rating. And once it was completed, they gave us a AA3 credit rating. So the obligations rated AA are judged to be of high quality and they're subject to very low credit risk. But Moody's does append numerical modifiers to those numbers. So you get 1, 2, and 3, with 1 being that modifier indicates the obligation ranks in the higher end of that generic classification. Modifier 2 indicates a mid-range ranking. And the modifier 3, which we've got, indicates a ranking in the lower end of that generic rating category. But there's 9 different categories, with the AAA rating being the highest category, and AA is in the second category. So we're actually in the second ranking of the tiers of the 9. So we're still in good standing with our credit agencies, in my opinion.
And that meant no change in the rating.
There's
from-
been no change in our credit rating since 2018.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Robin, anything you'd like to add this evening? Okay. All right, we'll move into item 5. I'll entertain a motion to consider business by mayor and members.
So moved.
So moved.
I
Or
heard
second.
motion made by Mr. Anderson, second by Ms. Pesky. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, starting on the screen. Anything else this evening, Mr. Anderson?
So I don't know if today is the day to discuss this, but I understand there was a lively discussion at council yesterday. With the opening of the new shelter on, I think, Prospect Street, are we going to expect any change in the police department's overtime or staffing to help with that, or where does that all stand?
So first, the opening of the facility is on hold until the Planning and Zoning Commission has an opportunity to hear or opine on a request for a special exception. You know, that is a church. It's been approved for church use. Overnight sheltering is not consistent with that approval. So there was a misstep in getting out there publicly saying that this is going to open on December 1st. Obviously, there are some additional processes that need to be accomplished. The overnight sheltering, utilizing state funding, which triggers the 211 system, is new since 2020. In the winter of 2020, 2021, 2022, and now 23, this type of overnight sheltering is new. The funds are great because it provides for staffing in these facilities versus working with church volunteers. And historically, there have been more responses to these facilities. Last year, the facility was actually run out of Winsted. Historically, yes, there is more call volume for police, some medical response, but it did not have a significant impact on overtime, mostly because those calls were responded to by patrolmen on duty.
Okay, so it's within our regular budget. That makes
I
sense.
think so, yeah. Well, of course, we'll always monitor that, and every year the outcry is that this is the last year, the state isn't going to fund it again. You know, this was the state's effort to, during the pandemic, get a count on where everybody was and, you know, get them into a safe environment where they could be tested. And if they were ill, get them treated. So I do believe that this particular type of function will probably not exist in years out. However, homelessness will continue to exist. So we do have a lot of work to do as to how we're going to address that on a permanent basis. More importantly, on a permanent basis that does not require that it be put next to 2 elementary schools and a preschool.
Sure. I mean, it's a very necessary service, but we could have a long discussion about the state making things mandatory and then not funding them.
Yes.
So we'll leave that be. Thank you. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. Staying in the Zoom room, anything this evening, Mr. Wright?
No, I'm very good. Thank you. I'd just like to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving and enjoy the day.
Thank you. Ms. Iannacido.
So,
Ms. Pesky.
yes, Mayor. I had on my schedule that this November Board of Finance meeting was to also be a meeting of the OPEB board, which we have scheduled twice a year, typically May and November. And obviously that was not on our agenda tonight. Can you let us know what the plan is to review the now, particularly in light of these findings, wanting to make sure, not in light of the findings, in light of what's going on with the stock market, you know, where we stand.
So I know that, again, bringing Alice Prue in to help us fill any of these gaps, that was one of the one of the items on the list that Robin and Alice were going to be working on. It is not ready yet. I don't know if it'll be ready for December. But we are also working with Hooker Holcomb. Hooker Holcomb is the agency that brings the full report. We'll do our best to see if we can get that done in the next month.
It was good to see that I mean, it's not huge amounts of increases, and the money is still woefully inadequate to take care of our obligations to our former employees, but we're at least headed in the right direction.
And I appreciate that comment. Yeah, you're right. I think, and that's a credit to this board. So when we decided that we were going to adopt a policy that that committed regular annual funding and then surplus funding was the right thing for this board to do. And it's starting to show it's starting to pay back some dividends. So, all right, if there are no other questions or comments, there being no further business before the board, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Wright.
Second, yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
All right. Good night. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Chris.
you, too.
Bye, Jim.